And the way I like to start out with this each year is to take you back to 7th grade. It was the fraction, decimal, percent equivalent lesson, right? So, I don't know, Mr. Meeks probably gave you a column that said fractions, and then another column that says decimal, and another column that says percent. Remember this lesson? Okay? And there's 3 different ways to write the same amount. Okay? And then there were some problems that he started off and gave you the fraction and said, oh, a half. What's that as a decimal and a percent? There were other problems where he started out with the decimal and said, hey, here's the decimal. What's the fraction in the percent? And then what was the third way? Oh, here's a percent. What's the decimal and the fraction, right? So there's 3 different ways to write the same amount, okay? And then you had to know, and then I gave you 3 really easy ones. There was sometimes you had to do calculations. Maybe you didn't know what 3/8 was and you had to do long division. But you knew that the decimal version of 1/2 is 5/10 or 50/100, which is the same as 50%. So you were easily able to fill those 2 in. The decimal, you would say, oh, 25/100 is the same as 25 over 100, but then you had to reduce, right? And that's 25%. And then 10%, you knew it was the same as having 1/10 of something, which is 1/10. Okay, so regardless of whether you remembered how to do all that, you get the concept, right? Because we're doing the exact same concept, except I'm going to relabel these columns as not fraction, decimal, percent. Here's what they're going to be. I'm going to start a new page. So my first column is not going to be fraction. It's going to be slope-intercept form. That's a C. My second column is going to be standard form. And my third column is going to be something you probably have never heard of, point slope form. Okay? I can remember where my ruler is now. I have no. So these are going to be the 3 columns that we are converting back and forth between, just like fraction, decimal, percent. Okay, so these are going to be the tops. Your lines do not have to be perfect, that's fine. Okay? So what this means is I'm going to give you an equation in slope-intercept form, like maybe y equals 2x minus 1. But I'm going to leave these 2 columns blank, and you have to know how to take it from slope-intercept and put it into standard and point slope. And right now, you've worked with standard form. You just probably didn't know what it was called. You'll know it when you see it. You know nothing about point slope form yet, and I'm not even going to talk about it today. Okay, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Okay, this is, I might give you one in standard form and say 2x minus 3y equals 8. Hey, now put it in the other 2 forms. And I'll give you a little preview of what point slope form is going to look like. Y minus 3 equals 2 times x minus 1. I know, you're probably looking at that going, what? That looks so confusing. It is not bad. We're going to talk about it tomorrow, and it's actually quite easy. But you already have some experience with this, so we're going to talk about that first. Okay, so you can continue to draw a couple lines, but you can leave them blank. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to actually have you, first of all, it's important that you know what these forms are. So we know slope-intercept form is mx plus b, right? You may or may not know that standard form, does everybody recognize that? We've seen it before. It's the x term, the y term, and then the constant. The a and the b just stand for like coefficients. So you have an x term, the y term, the equal sign, and then the constant. And when it's in that form, it doesn't matter whether it's a plus or minus, it is in standard form. Okay? Point slope form, a little different. Y minus y sub 1 is equal to m times x minus x sub 1. And we'll talk about all that tomorrow. Basically, while you're copying that down, that's kind of the opposite of an exponent. An exponent is a superscript that's up high. This is called a subscript, and it's down low. The prefix sub means below, right? Submarine means below. So this, we're going to talk about that tomorrow, but that's what point slope form is. We're going to just go back and forth between these two today. And you already know how to do one of the ways, okay? So I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to come back to it. So let's take a look at this equation right here. Let me see which one I want to do first. Okay. 2x plus 3y equals 6. You saw this on 4-1. And I asked you to find the slope of the line. And you could not tell me what the slope of the line was until you did what? Solved it for y, right? Isn't solving it for y putting it in slope-intercept form? So maybe you want to go ahead and write that. Slope-intercept form just is a fancy way of saying get y alone. That's all it is. And then you have your x and your constant. It doesn't really matter the order of those. As long as y is by itself, it's in slope-intercept form. Okay? So let's go back to doing that. So if I want to get y by itself, do you remember what the first thing we did was? We had to cancel out the x term to get it gone, right? And so I always use inverse operations, so I would subtract that. And when this cancels, some people even like to draw what there was left there. Okay, you have an option here. Remember what your options were? You could either put 6 minus 2x, or you'll always see me do it. I kind of just like to have it in slope-intercept form. Negative 2x plus 6 and 6 minus 2x mean the same thing. It's just the commutative property. Move them around as much as you want, but just keep the signs what they're supposed to be. You'll see me do it this way. I'm so close to having it in slope-intercept form. I just need to do what? Get y by itself. And what does 3y mean? It means 3 times y. And what's the opposite of multiplying? So do you remember doing something like this? So I'm going to divide everything by 3. And that's going to leave me with my y, which is awesome because that's why I did this. 6 divided by 3 is 2. And then negative 2/3 doesn't reduce. Oh, so there's my slope. It's negative 2/3 x. You'd get the same thing if you did it in this order also. Just so you know, you'd still get y is equal to, there's your negative 2/3 x, and there's your plus 2. Okay? You'll see me most of the time writing it that way. Okay? So, did I just go from standard form to slope-intercept form? Did you already know how to do that? Yeah. Okay? So, maybe somewhere up here, go ahead and write standard to slope-intercept. You already knew how to do that. That was just me now giving a name to this process. Standard to slope-intercept, okay? Which means if I give you slope-intercept, could you put it into standard? Could you go backwards with what we just did? Meaning, if I have y equals 2x plus 1, and this is like counterintuitive. Do you know what that word means? It means it goes against what we're so used to doing. Don't you feel like for like the whole month before Christmas we solved for y, we solved for y, we solved for y, and now we're undoing it? Yeah, because I need to get it into standard form. And there's one move that needs to be made. In standard form, don't forget, it's the x with the y, and then the constant all by itself. So what's got to go here? It's like I got to put the 2x back, right? And how do I get rid of it? Please watch. Okay? Minus 2x, and I don't see either one of you writing anything down. I need you to write some stuff down. So when I cancel this out, you're going to see me. Now be careful because standard form, I want to put my x first, then my y. So I am going to put this, then I'm going to put my plus y, and then I'm going to put my 1. But you're not done. There's going to be one little extra thing. And I want you to kind of circle that and put a little standard form. X coefficient must be two things. So it's got to be two things. One of them is not right now. It's got to be positive. X coefficient means that number. That 2 has got to be positive. Right now it's not. So I'm going to have to do something. And it's got to be a whole number. Which means it can't be what? What kind of numbers aren't whole numbers? Can't be fractions. All right. Well, we're good on the fraction scene, but we're not good on the positive scene. I got to get it positive. So, after you get the X where it needs to be, you got to look. Is it positive? And is it a whole number? If it's not, you're going to have to do something to the whole equation to make it fit those categories. So what could I multiply everything by? Yeah. A negative. Well, I could do it by a -2. I don't really need to do the -2. Let's just do it by -1. And all you do when you multiply by a -1 is change the sign of everything in there. So that -2 is now positive. Awesome, because that's how I needed it to be. But that also means that that y is no longer positive, it's negative. And that 1 is no longer positive, it's negative. So you might be confused. If you forget that step, that's kind of the difference between a 3 and a 4. A 3 means, yeah, I got it in kind of in standard form. Oh, but I forgot about this. You're going to look and say, why are all mine opposite? Because your leading coefficient of x probably was negative. Let's do another one. So you have to make sure that it's positive and a whole number. So y is equal to -1/2 x plus 6. So I need to get this x gone. And what's going to do the opposite of a -1/2 x? Adding 1/2 x to both sides. It cancels it here. It leaves me with 1/2 x plus the y equals 6. But I'm not in the clear yet because it has to be positive. Awesome, it's positive. But now it's not a whole number. It's a fraction. I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to multiply by something that's not a -1. What could I multiply to get that 1/2 to be a whole number? 2. Would multiplying by the denominator work? Yeah, because I know you learned in 4th grade or whatever, when you multiply, if there's a number in the denominator, if you put the same number in the numerator, they cancel, right? That's why I'm going to multiply by 2/1. But I'm just going to put a 2 there. Okay? The hardest thing is remembering to do it for the whole equation and not just the x coefficient. So 1/2 of 2 is just 1, so I don't need to put a 1. But then 2 times y and 2 times 6. Okay? So this is the answer that I'm looking for. Must be positive. Okay? And then I'm going to have you try 1 here. So what would I do for this one? Y is equal to a positive 3/4 x plus 2. So I'm going from slope-intercept to standard. It's going to take you a little while to get used to them all. And so I want to get rid of my x term and subtract it from both sides. That leaves you with -3/4 x, my plus y, and my 2, because those canceled. Are you with me? Am I going too fast? But I'm not done, because it has to be a positive whole number, and it's neither. So what could I multiply this time by? So I need to multiply by a negative to get rid of the negative, and a 4 to get rid of the 4. Okay? Watch what that does. So the 4's cancel, and a negative times a negative is a positive, and I'm just left with what? 3. 3x. That's it. All that gives me 3x. And then you're home free for the rest. Negative 4 times y and negative 4 times 2. That is going to be the answer when you check, not that. Okay? So you have to be careful and make sure that it's correct. Positive whole number. Okay. So your assignment is just going to be some practice problems here. I'm going to go back to the first table that I had you guys do, and I'm going to add in 4 problems here, and I'm going to give you 2 of each. And so all you have is 2 little problems to do. Okay? So the first problem you're going to get is y equals 3/5 x plus 1. Turn it into standard. I'm going to give you 4x minus 2y equals 8. I'm going to ask you to turn it into slope-intercept, and then I'll give you another one. Okay? And we will talk about this column tomorrow. It deserves a whole day just to itself.